From 1929 to 1939 was something known as the Great Depression. Many of you have grandparents or great-grandparents that lived through that time period. My grandparents were definitely affected, and it affected the rest of their lives. I remember seeing tinfoil folded up, the canning that went on with my grandmother, just the frugal living, even though when they died, they had well over $1 million in the bank. One of the things that happened during the Great Depression was that a lot of people had invested a lot of money in America. And when that money was recalled because of the crash, a lot of businesses failed and a lot of people were laid off work and a lot of people lost their homes. My grandmother in particular, it was really funny. One time she was talking about the Great Depression and she said, you know, it was funny because we didn't really realize we were in a Great Depression because we were poor already. And this, of course, was during that time period. Also, one thing that she did say was that if we ever have another Great Depression, she goes, I'm worried, because back then people helped each other. They worked together. Said now, people being so selfish and so mean, she goes, it really worries me what could happen. Now, one of the big problems was housing. People lost their homes. A lot of the banks closed, and because of that, they weren't able to get their savings out. They weren't able to, get money that they had put back. If they didn't have it in their home or on their person, they just didn't have the money, especially when those who lost their jobs. And because of industry just closing down everywhere, there just weren't jobs available. And so these people lost their homes, or a lot of families would move in together. They'd have moms and dads move in with their adult children, grandparents, aunts and uncles. I mean, the house would be full. But together they could survive by working together, doing their part in helping to pay the house payment. A lot of people slept in their cars and their trucks. A lot of people just went out and lived in tents and lean-tos. Power was difficult. A lot of places didn't even have power then. But paying the power bill was just an added expense. And it's one of the things that's a big saying is we had everything except money. And money makes the world go round. Now, one thing, especially during heat waves, when there was no power, people would take sheets, wet them, and put them up in the doorways. And as the wind blew through, it would cool off the room. Another thing is they would sleep outside at night in their lawns or in parks to stay cool. A lot of times when we say SHTF, we think of roving bands of bandits and, riots and civil unrest, which is definitely possible. But there always comes a point where life kind of settles back and things, like food, shelter, and clothing, are the essentials. Now, one of the problems was jobs. There just weren't any jobs. Factories had closed. There were a lot of people looking for work. Some people would just load up in their vehicles and drive wherever they had to find work. A lot of people would follow the harvest and would become really migrant workers. They would take their families around and go from location to location, just harvesting produce and vegetables or tending, livestock or whatever they could do. To just be able to get that food and just pay the necessities just to live. It was a really bad time of hardship. It was really funny because a lot of farms in some areas just couldn't pay the workers because the food was going for so cheap. And because of that, large areas of crops just rotted while people in other areas starved to death. That is one thing that if transportation were to come to a standstill, a lot of the country would be in big trouble, especially the urban areas. Being able to produce food is very difficult. Now, it was funny, a lot of people would go around and just do odd jobs, whatever they could do. Whether it was fix a fence, work on a door, fix plumbing, whatever it took. But the one thing is, the more skill that you had, the better your chance was to earn money. We all have different skills, but are those skills based on only technology? Learning those type skills to be able to have something to barter with. I'll repair your fence if you give me a dozen eggs. And when you're really hungry, that's a great deal. Now, children were also expected to find ways to earn money. In fact, no one was immune, except maybe the youngest, to go out and find odd jobs, maybe to collect things, maybe to find wild berries and fruits and things that were out in nature, gather up firewood to be able to sell it. There were a lot of things to do. A lot of people just went around and looked for things that were free. But one thing too is we're actually going more to a cashless society. Many of you don't even carry cash in your billfold because that credit card or that debit card is so convenient. But guys, I'll tell you, and I've said this in a number of videos, having some cash put back is just like, it's better than money in the bank. There it is, you have it, and if things go south, you're able to at least have something to rely on. And it'll at least give you some time. You know, it kind of cuts down on the panic. I know during the Depression, my other grandmother, she used to cut hair just for a living. And people would come by and she would cut their hair, she would charge a little bit, and it would just give the family that much more money to be able to use for things that they needed. A lot of ladies went and started cooking meals for workers. And so the workers would come by and pick up the meals and pay her, and then they would be able to, again, help their family and to be able to get by. Now, because the Depression lasted 10 years, clothing began to be worn and tattered. Being able to put patches on clothes, being able to actually sew, to be a seamstress, to be able to make clothes. You know, that is something that we have really lost, the skill that we've lost. And so being able to do those where you can repair the clothes, repair a lot of different things, but clothes in particular. One thing that was kind of funny is they would take the rubber from tires and use them to resole shoes. And having the equipment, the thick needles or whatever you need to get through that tire rubber to be able to attach it to a leather shoe, you know, is something that, you know, would be tough. And I think one of the things that is definitely something to take away here is having the right tools. Being able to have the tools to repair and to fix things. Last but not least, food. And that pretty much goes unsaid, how important food is. But, you know, our gardening skills have weakened. You know, we don't garden like we used to. And it's very important to have gardening skills, even if it's just a small garden in your backyard that possibly you could expand. Another thing is with hybrid seeds, you know, you're not able to reproduce seeds and reproduce those vegetables. So, you know, having some kind of heirloom seed that you can harvest. A lot of times in the Depression, they grew huge gardens, and it takes a lot of food to be able to feed your family. And with that, they would take food that they had excess or surplus of, and they would trade it with maybe a farmer that had chickens or a farmer that had beef, and they would trade around, and it would help to kind of supplement their diet. A lot of people, though, really went hungry, and they just used whatever items they had. You know, Depression soup was just whatever they could find and whatever they could put together. And sometimes the taste wasn't excellent, but sometimes the taste was really good. Guys, you know, a lot of people just go out to eat on most of their meals, and they don't really keep a lot of food in their pantry, and even if they did, they wouldn't really know how to prepare that much. One of the big things with the Depression was that a lot of the prepared foods, whether it was restaurants or even grocery stores, had very little as far as in prepared foods. They had the basics. And so learning how to use those foods, how to cook from scratch, is a big deal. It's something that really would be great to practice, especially now that we have a lot of resources. We can do that and we can learn. Plus, it's just a lot of fun. Now, you may have a lot of long-term food storage, which we do, but being able to process that food is something that takes some skill. And really, you need to know how to take those foods, how to take those dried beans and that rice and be able to put it together to make it something palatable. Of course, one big thing was community gardens. A lot of times in parks and things like that, the city just opened it up and people would have their plot and they would grow vegetables. But also hunting and fishing. Guys, if you've never skinned a rabbit or a deer or whatever, you know, that you're going out, or if you don't really know about wild edibles, going out and finding those wild edibles, now is a very important time to learn those things. So guys, there's a lot of resources out there. There are a lot of good books on the Depression, and I highly recommend you start reading some of those. Maybe just do some research into the Depression, see what really went on. It could possibly give you a lot of good ideas. You know, a lot of times we have certain plans and ideas about bugging out or bunkering in and all this stuff, but we don't really get down to the nitty-gritty of everyday life. Now, guys, one thing I want to leave you with is one of the things that really impressed me about looking over all this with the Great Depression is that people helped each other. They reached out, they worked together, they did what they could. If they had a little extra, they were willing to give it to someone else and, you know, to help one another. A lot of times in the prepper community and the survival community, we get very lone wolf minded. And guys, it takes a group to come together. You can't do it on your own. You've got to build a team. And guys, the more that you have together of good, solid people, the better off you're going to be. And guys, if you're really serious about prepping and survival, check out Survival Dispatch Insider. It is the best source on the web to learn about real-world prepping and survival. A lot of the world's leading experts are there on the Insider. I upload one video a week that's exclusive to the Insider, and guys, I'll tell you, it will transform the way you think about survival and prepping. And I'll have a link down below in the description. Be strong, be of good courage. God bless America. Long live the Republic. Because really, the Industrial Revolution, I gotta get off my butt here. Get their money, their hard-earned money. But in a life and death situation, SHTF situation, in a survival situation, a little more earth-friendly, if that's even something I want to say, which I don't. Earth-friendly. Sound like I'm a tree hugger, and I'm definitely not.